What if I told you there's a family in Europe that you've never heard of that secretly controls the entire continent? In fact, their far-reaching tentacles reach around the world, and it's nothing new. This has been going on for hundreds of years, and they continue to have a hand in how major global events unfold. From World War II to the Russian-Ukraine war and even North Korea, meet the Wallenberg family, a family 3 times richer than the richest man in the world, and their main holding company being worth 10% of Sweden's entire GDP. And they own everything from AstraZeneca to the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. But how does one family exert such a vast influence? And how did they build such an insane empire that spans over 5 generations? But a fair warning, after researching for this video, it's impossible to ignore the countless controversies surrounding this family and how they managed to have a hand in every single global affair. And once you see how this works, you won't be able to look away. It's 1837 and the United States is undergoing a massive financial crisis. Known as the Panic of 1837, speculative lending prices and a huge drop in the price of cotton led to a depression where wages dropped, unemployment rose, and there was nothing but pessimism in the air. But as Winston Churchill would say 100 years later, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that is exactly what Andre Oscar Wallenberg did. It's 1837, Andre was only 21 years old, but took the long journey from Sweden to the United States and served as a sailor and quickly learned firsthand how banks should not be run. You see, at the time, banks in Sweden, like banks around the world, were slow, boring, and didn't make that much money. But Andre returned to Sweden after his time in the United States, not only ready to be a banker, but ready to change the entire banking industry as a whole. Like all good businessmen, he realized that in order to be rich, you need money, and for a banker, that means you want to hold on to people's deposits for as long as possible, and you never want them to ask for their money back. But how can you do this? Through higher interest rates, of course. Andre was the first banker to introduce higher interest rates to encourage people to leave their money in the bank. By also introducing the postal exchange, which meant for the first time that money could more easily be transferred to different locations, Andre was now able to use people's deposits to fund investments. Now today, this isn't groundbreaking. It's no secret that the money you deposit into your bank actually isn't there when you walk into that bank to withdraw it. But in the 1800s, this was groundbreaking and was the first seed that would transform the Wallenberg family all the way back in the 1800s into what they are today. Unsurprisingly, this began to make the family a ton of money. But what often comes with huge amounts of wealth? Anger, distrust, and even hatred from outsiders. In fact, Swedish sentiment towards Andre in later years was terrible. He was widely hated, but he was able to maintain his position in the quickly growing banking world by hobnobbing with other bankers from around the world, creating a vast network of allies that continues to this day. It's this capitalizing on a crisis that first made the family a fortune and created what would go on to be their signature playbook. Capitalize on a crisis and have your hands in as many industries as possible. Lucky for them, World War II was only a few decades away and was just another great opportunity for them to spread their tentacles and gain even more power. It's now the 1940s and World War II is well underway. Germany and the Nazis are aggressively moving their way throughout Europe, capturing Austria, Poland, Denmark, France, Norway, and many more. Amongst the chaos were, of course, the Wallenbergs. You see, the Wallenbergs recognized 2 things that would go on to make them even richer than they already were. Number 1, war takes money, and if you're on the right side of things, you can make a ton of money during war. And that brings us to point number 2. The Wallenbergs recognized that money does not pick a side. So while it looked like Germany was going to stroll to a victory in 39 and 40 before they invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, nothing was certain, and money hates uncertainty. So what did the Wallenbergs do? Amongst the chaos of the worst war in human history, Jacob Wallenberg decided to develop a close connection with the Nazis in Berlin and decided to help them through his various companies. In fact, through their company SKF, they even supplied the Nazis with ball bearings, a critical component for many types of military equipment, including vehicles, aircraft, and weapons. They supplied so much equipment that there's even estimates that the war went on for 2 years longer than it would have had they not supplied the equipment. But the Nazis did not complain. They even awarded Jacob the Grand Cross, a prestigious award they gave to foreign diplomats, showing just how heavily involved Jacob Wallenberg was with the Nazis. So you might be thinking that the Wallenbergs were very fervent Nazi supporters, but not so fast. Remember, this is all about money and power, and the money doesn't pick a side until the very last minute when you know who the winner is going to be. So while all of this was going on in Germany and Berlin, Marcus Wallenberg was all the way across the pond in New York, working with the Americans and the British. This was a powerful move, ensuring that the Wallenbergs would remain in a position of power with an influential network at their disposal regardless of who won the war. But come 1944, it was clear that the Germans were going to lose, so it was time to pick a side, right? Well, in the spring of 1944, the Wallenbergs promised the Allies that they would stop exporting to the Nazis. But it turns out that the Wallenbergs aren't a family that like to turn away from making a dollar. Even after this promise, they continued to smuggle exports into Germany and even tried to cut off the supply of ball bearings to the US defense industry. By the end of the war, the US put a blockade on one of Wallenberg's banks, but that lasted for only a whole 2 years. There's a quote from the documentary Wallenbergs where it says, quote, "The businessmen in the United States probably did not take what the Wallenbergs had done that seriously. They had an understanding of such pragmatic things. None of them terminated the acquaintance with the Wallenbergs." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the rich get richer. But all of this is just the beginning. Of course, we all make mistakes. We all have a dark past that we're not necessarily proud of. So of course, the Wallenbergs learned from their dark past and decided to never repeat it and now have a squeaky clean track record. Not exactly. The Wallenbergs, unlike most rich families that give everything to their kids and lose it all within a couple of generations, they don't mess around. While most Americans are dancing on TikTok, they continue to put an extreme importance on education and actual work experience. This is all in an effort to groom them to run the family business, but perhaps more importantly, to maintain their high-level influential network around the world. And the Wallenbergs do it better than any family in the world. In the 1930s, who was the emerging global superpower? It was Germany and the Nazis. And as we've seen, they quickly developed very tight relations with them. Ask yourself now then, in the 2020s, who's emerging as the new global superpower? It's not the United States, of course, it is China. And the Wallenbergs recognize this. Peter Wallenberg Sr. first started developing a relationship with China all the way back in the 1970s, becoming close friends with Jiang Zemin, the former general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. And this was just the beginning of them building their massively influential global network as the world slowly began to enter the modern age. But the question is, how did they actually do this? We'll take the 1980s. It's now a few years since Nixon is out of office, and you just come to learn that his former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, opened his very own consulting firm in New York City. Being a family worth billions and always wanting to network with powerful people while remaining out of the public eye, the Wallenbergs jump on the opportunity and become his key clients, paying Kissinger a fixed fee of $200,000 a year and a monthly fee of $100,000 to go through the global landscape and how to position their companies accordingly. And it's this partnership that helped the Wallenbergs to illegally export high-tech equipment to Eastern Europe. I guess old habits die hard, but all of this sounds quite harsh, so maybe we should look to see what George Bush Sr. had to say on the family, because of course the Bushes would never lie about anything. In 1993, George Bush Sr. said on Peter Wallenberg, he could have rested on the extraordinary laurels of his family, but he chose to build and create. He is a man of enormous competence and dimension. And who is likely listening to this comment? Another man who's never been known to lie, George Soros, of course. Fast forward to 1998, and Soros secretly traveled to Sweden to meet with the Wallenbergs, who would go on to be the main backers of George Soros's quantum group of funds. The good news is that George Soros has never done anything bad, so there's nothing to worry about on this one. All these connections are what allowed the family to maintain their massive sphere of influence. Influence that's so strong that even in the early 2000s, they began meeting with the World Economic Forum and the IMF. In 2016, Marcus Wallenberg visited Saudi Arabia. In 2018, the family visited with President Trump at the White House. In 2022, Jacob Wallenberg went to a secret meeting in Finland to meet with the Swedish Minister of Finance and the President of Finland to talk with NATO. And the list goes on and on. The Wallenberg family has their tentacles in every corner of the world, and it goes to show that it's the unelected officials that have just as much, if not more, influence than the officials that we do elect. But don't worry, I'm sure they have great intentions, and I won't mention AstraZeneca, which they own, because of course the science is the science. But if any of this is concerning to you, I've been going down a huge rabbit hole lately on Bitcoin, and so you're going to want to watch this video here on how one man owns all of the Bitcoin. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.